My parents skipped my wedding because I got married before my perfect sister. Now their golden daughter's big day is falling apart. I didn't expect much from my parents when I told them I was engaged, but I also didn't expect silence. No congratulations, no questions about the proposal, not even a fake smile or some bland words of support. Just dead air. I remember standing there with my phone in one hand, still feeling the warmth of Darren's palm from just a few minutes earlier, as he slipped a simple ring onto my finger while we sat on the couch eating lo mein and watching reruns of some awful detective show from the 90s. That quiet, private moment was perfect in every way, which probably explains why my parents immediately found a way to ruin it. Let me give you some context. My younger sister Melody has always been the star of the family, and I mean that quite literally. From the moment she could form full sentences, it was like the universe had granted her some kind of celestial spotlight that followed her around and dimmed everyone else in comparison, especially me. She was tall, graceful, conventionally beautiful, and exceptional at everything. I know people say that about siblings, but I mean everything. Spelling bees, piano recitals, gymnastics competitions, debate tournaments, and eventually modeling gigs by the time she hit 19. My parents treated her like the center of a universe that the rest of us were lucky to orbit. By contrast, I was short, solidly built, and more at home behind a computer than in front of a camera. While Melody was doing runway shows in Chicago and appearing in promotional campaigns for local designers, I was studying Python, collecting Pokemon cards I was too embarrassed to admit I still liked, and learning how to fix my high school's janky website after class. I got my degree in computer science from a decent university, started working at a mid-level position at a tech company in Portland, and built a life that wasn't glamorous but stable and fulfilling. My parents never really knew what I did for a living beyond something with computers, and honestly, they never really asked. It wasn't just that they ignored my accomplishments, it was how they reacted to them. When I got a promotion at work, my mom responded with, "Oh, that's good," then immediately pivoted to talking about Melody's most recent modeling contract. When I showed them the condo I bought by myself at 28, they barely glanced up from the real estate listings they were reviewing for Melody's future dream home. Every holiday gathering was a showcase of her latest successes, her new relationship, her perfect hair, her toned arms, her meticulous career. I was a background character in the story of their perfect daughter. I gave up trying to win their approval sometime in my mid-20s, which was probably the healthiest thing I've ever done. I stopped trying to compete with Melody and focused instead on building a life I actually liked. I found friends who cared about me without conditions. I found work that challenged and fulfilled me. And, eventually, I found Darren. He wasn't flashy or rich or anything my parents would immediately respect, but he was real. He was kind. And he saw me, the me that had always been overlooked. That was all I'd ever really wanted. We were together for 4 years before he proposed. He didn't plan some extravagant trip or big showy dinner. We were in sweatpants, watching TV, eating from takeout containers, and he pulled the ring from a drawer in our coffee table like it was the most natural thing in the world. And in that moment, it was. I said yes without hesitation, tears in my eyes and laughter bubbling up from somewhere I hadn't felt joy in a long time. I called my parents the next day, still glowing, still foolishly hopeful they'd feel some version of happiness for me. I should have known better. Instead of joy or excitement, my mother asked if I was really sure I wanted to dive in before I'd taken some time to get my health in order. That was code, by the way. My mom never had the tact to avoid saying what she really meant when it came to my body. I've never been thin, and growing up, she made sure I never forgot it. She enrolled me in fitness camps I didn't ask for, micromanaged my meals, and compared my size to Melody's like it was some kind of moral failing. I was 16 when she told me, "You'd look more like your sister if you just had some discipline." My dad didn't say anything during the engagement call. Not a single word. That should have told me everything I needed to know, but I let myself pretend it was nerves or surprise. I didn't want to believe that my parents, the same ones who threw a backyard celebration for Melody's first print modeling job, would completely ignore my engagement because I didn't fit into their picture of what success or beauty looked like. Still, I pushed forward with wedding planning. I had no interest in pageantry or tradition, and Darren and I agreed on a small ceremony in a garden park outside Tacoma, followed by an afternoon reception under the trees. The whole thing was calm, beautiful, and completely us. His mother helped me pick out my dress, a simple off-white gown with a flowing A-line skirt that made me feel both elegant and comfortable. When I sent a photo to my mom, she replied, "That's very practical. Good choice for your figure." It wasn't even meant as a compliment. Just another carefully worded insult wrapped in civility. We sent out both paper and digital invitations to everyone on the list, including my parents and Melody. Darren and I even checked for delivery receipts and confirmation. Both email invites were marked as opened, and the physical ones were delivered to their mailbox with no returns. When I realized they hadn't RSVP'd, I reached out by text, email, even a call. I got vague answers about checking the calendar and being overwhelmed with work, but no actual commitment. Eventually, I stopped asking. I knew they weren't coming. I think deep down, I knew they never intended to. The wedding day was beautiful and excruciating all at once. The weather was perfect, the flowers in full bloom, and Darren's family filled every corner with warmth and laughter. But when I stood at the front and saw the empty seats that were supposed to be for my parents, I felt something twist inside me. Not because I needed them there to feel valid, but because even on the most important day of my life, I still felt like I didn't matter enough. Not enough to interrupt their weekend. Not enough to be celebrated. Just not enough. I danced with Darren's father instead of my own. My new sister-in-law gave a toast that made me cry in the best way. Darren squeezed my hand so many times during that night, I lost count. And still, there was this quiet echo inside me, asking why I wasn't worthy of the kind of love my sister had always been showered with. Why I had to build my own family from scratch, while Melody had everything handed to her without asking. But the truth hit me harder after the honeymoon, when I called my parents and asked, very calmly, why they hadn't come. My mother went off like a firework. She claimed they never received an invitation, that I had purposefully excluded them, that I had sabotaged my own wedding just to play the victim. I reminded her about the email receipts and the confirmed delivery notice. She brushed it off and accused me of being dramatic. My dad barely said a word. Again, that was when I realized they weren't just absent, they were never going to be present. Not truly. Not for me. After the wedding, I told myself I'd stop trying. That I would finally let go of this stupid fantasy I'd held onto my whole life. The one where my parents would someday see me for who I was, not just who I failed to be compared to Melody. I wanted to believe the silence after my wedding was the final blow. But then something else happened, something that shifted the ground beneath me. Melody got engaged. And suddenly, I wasn't just invisible again, I was an obstacle. They announced it at a cousin's birthday dinner I hadn't been invited to. Someone sent me a picture of Melody holding up a ring the size of a peppercorn on a manicured hand, her perfect teeth locked in a smirk that screamed, "Look who's finally doing it right." The caption said something like, "Can't wait to marry my best friend in wine country," and I couldn't help but laugh. Not because I found it funny, but because I realized in that moment just how hard they had tried to erase the fact that I'd already done the thing they'd been saving for her. Within a week, my parents had practically turned into unpaid wedding planners. My mother, who had shown zero interest in helping me plan a single aspect of my own ceremony, suddenly had spreadsheets and mood boards and a Pinterest account filled with ivory roses, chandeliers, and Italian villas. Melody hadn't even picked a date yet, and they were touring venues in Napa Valley like they were auditioning to host a royal coronation. Every family group chat, which I had long since muted, was lit up with photos of dress fittings, champagne tastings, and bride-to-be brunches where Melody sat surrounded by women clinking glasses and pretending the past hadn't happened. Then people started asking questions. Cousins, aunts, even a few family friends reached out to me privately with the same awkward hesitation. "Hey, I didn't realize your parents didn't come to your wedding. Is everything okay?" I didn't try to spin it or soften it. I just told the truth. They didn't approve. They couldn't handle that I got married first. No theatrics. No embellishments. Just facts. Somehow, that honesty did more damage to their reputation than I could have done with any lie. Word spread like wildfire, not because I was gossiping, but because the contrast was too obvious. There I was, standing under a canopy of trees with my husband and his family, smiling through the ache of absence, while Melody was being prepped like a debutante for a wedding that hadn't even taken form yet. And people noticed. Slowly, relatives started backing out of her engagement events. At first, it was a few polite declines. Then it was full-on silence in the RSVP threads. My mom blamed bad timing, but it wasn't that. It was shame. Somewhere in the middle of that unraveling mess, I got a text from Melody. Her tone was clinical, polished, and exactly what I expected. "I know you're hurting, but what you said to our relatives was unfair. Mom and Dad have always done their best. You didn't have to sabotage this for me." She ended it with a smiley face, as if that made it less cruel. I stared at the screen for a long time before blocking her number. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I just didn't see the point of continuing a conversation with someone who still believed their comfort was more important than my truth. But Melody wasn't done. A few days later, Darren walked into the kitchen with a weird look on his face. He handed me his phone and told me to read it myself. She had texted him. My sister had gone out of her way to find my husband's personal number, probably through one of his tagged social media posts, and decided to explain, in great detail, why I was the problem. She started the message with some faux professional garbage about reaching out in the spirit of family unity, then pivoted quickly to veiled insults. She told him that I was emotionally reactive, and that our marriage would be stronger if he helped me gain perspective. She actually used the phrase, "Some people in our family require more guidance than others," as if she was doing us both a favor. But the part that sent me into full-body laughter was near the end, where she wrote, "Maintaining close relationships with successful family members like myself can only benefit your future." As if Darren was angling for a job at her fiancé's firm or desperate for some kind of clout. My husband, who teaches history and has zero interest in corporate nonsense, read that line out loud twice before saying, "She really thinks that matters to me." We didn't reply, at least not directly. Darren did send her a short, razor-sharp response that made me want to stand and applaud. "Thanks for your concern about Rebecca's well-being. As her husband, I support her happiness, not manage her behavior. Please contact her directly if you have further thoughts." Short, clean, and impossible to misinterpret. She replied once more with, "Don't say I didn't try to help when this all blows up." That was the last thing we heard from her, at least for now. But the damage was already done, just not to us. Her attempt to meddle had the opposite effect. If anything, it reminded me exactly why I had spent years trying to detach from that side of the family. Her behavior wasn't just controlling, it was manipulative in a way that felt like second nature. She had done it when we were teenagers, whispering half-truths to friends behind my back to keep me isolated. She had done it when she turned my mother against any activity that might make me feel accomplished. Now she was just using fancier words and sending it through iMessages instead of scribbled notes and phone calls. For a long time, I tried to tell myself it was normal sibling rivalry, that it was just how families work. But it wasn't. This wasn't rivalry. This was erasure. She needed me to be lesser, to be quiet, to step aside so she could occupy the only role she thought had value. And when I didn't, when I lived my life on my terms and dared to do something before she could, she saw it as an attack. That realization didn't come with some big emotional climax. It came quietly, while Darren and I sat on our patio with wine and takeout again. Almost exactly the way we had the night he proposed. We were reviewing the messages and just laughing. Not from bitterness, but from disbelief. Melody had tried to destabilize me through the one person who would never be moved by her games, and the result was nothing but a stronger bond between the two of us. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to defend myself or explain anything. I wasn't the broken one. I wasn't the dramatic one. I wasn't the one making family harder than it needed to be. I had been pushed to the outside for so long that I'd learned to build my own center, and I wasn't moving from it. 3 days after Melody's last message to Darren, things began unraveling faster than I ever could have expected, and I didn't have to do a single thing to push them over the edge. I hadn't told anyone about her texts, hadn't responded to her accusations, hadn't even mentioned the growing number of family members quietly distancing themselves from her wedding plans. I thought the storm had passed. But apparently, when people like Melody and my parents lose control of the narrative, they start setting fires just to watch who runs from the smoke. It started with a call from my cousin Olivia, someone who had always tried to stay neutral no matter how messy things got between me and my family. Her tone was careful, the kind people use when they're afraid you'll hang up halfway through the conversation. She told me, in the gentlest way possible, that my parents had been calling around the family, one by one, trying to convince people that I had lied about them skipping my wedding. According to them, I had sent the invitations to outdated addresses and refused to follow up like a proper daughter would have. They even tried to say that I deliberately planned the wedding in a way that made it difficult for them to attend. The absurdity would have been funny if it hadn't been so desperate. They still live in the same house they've lived in since 1993. Their email hasn't changed since AOL stopped charging per minute. The idea that I had sent it to the wrong place, when both digital and physical confirmations were on record, was just sad. But the worst part wasn't the lie itself. It was that they were using that lie as a foundation to rebuild the image they were terrified of losing. They couldn't stand that people were starting to see behind the curtain, that the family they'd worked so hard to present as perfect was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion, built on years of favoritism, silence, and subtle cruelty. I stayed quiet. I didn't call anyone. I didn't try to correct the story, because I didn't have to. The truth had already started doing the work for me. At another cousin's baby shower the following weekend, my mother apparently lost it when someone made a casual joke about missing photos from my wedding. According to Olivia, who was there and described it in vivid detail, my mother went from smiling politely to full-on ranting in under 10 seconds. She accused me of changing after marriage, of poisoning people against Melody, and of trying to shatter the family from the inside out. Her voice was sharp, high-pitched, and cracking with that specific brand of panic only people who are watching their control slip ever seem to reach. And from what I heard, the room fell silent. People who hadn't even known there was tension began asking questions. A few relatives pulled Olivia aside afterward and told her they had no idea things were this bad, that they were beginning to understand why so many family members were backing out of Melody's wedding events. One aunt, who used to be my mother's closest ally in all things social, apparently said, "I think we've all spent too much time pretending nothing was wrong." In trying to defend themselves, my parents only confirmed everything they were being accused of, but it didn't stop there. Over the next week, more and more pieces started falling apart. A family friend who runs a boutique and had agreed to help with Melody's bridesmaids' dresses suddenly backed out, citing a conflict of values that was vague but clearly pointed. Another uncle, one who always remained quiet in the name of keeping peace, finally called me and apologized for not speaking up sooner. He said he was ashamed of how they treated me, and that he wouldn't be attending the wedding either. I didn't ask anyone to boycott. I never once told people to choose sides. But the truth, once it's been unsealed, doesn't need a campaign. It breathes on its own, and in this case, it moved through the family like a breeze that turned into a hurricane. My parents must have felt it, because they reached out again, not to apologize, not to make amends, but to confront me about the damage I was causing. My mother sent a long-winded email that read like it had been drafted by a frustrated publicist trying to contain a PR crisis. She told me I had deeply hurt the family, that my vindictive behavior had gone too far, and that my refusal to move on from perceived childhood grievances was destroying any hope for future reconciliation. She also accused me, again, of trying to ruin Melody's wedding out of jealousy, as if I sat around at night stewing over table linens and seating charts, plotting their downfall like a cartoon villain. But the most revealing part came when she wrote, "We never thought you'd stoop this low, Rebecca. We never thought you'd be so insecure about your sister's success that you'd lash out like this." That's when it hit me, not just that they didn't see me, but that they never had. They had never understood me, never really tried to. To them, I was just a problem to manage, a contrast to polish Melody's image against, a shadow that made their star shine brighter. Even now, In the aftermath of their absence, their focus was still on how my reaction made them look, not on the impact their actions had on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to send a reply so devastatingly accurate that they'd have to sit with the weight of their failure for once in their lives. But I didn't. I didn't write back at all, because I realized there was nothing I could say that would break through a wall they had spent my entire life building between us. They weren't interested in healing. They were only interested in salvaging the image they cared more about than their actual child. The silence, this time, felt like peace. For once, I didn't feel like I owed them anything. Not an explanation, not a defense, not a chance to rewrite history. My husband and I took a weekend trip to the coast that same week. We stayed at a small inn overlooking the cliffs, the kind of place with creaky floors, terrible coffee, and the most beautiful views I'd ever seen. One evening, as we watched the sun sink below the edge of the Pacific, he reached over and took my hand. I hadn't said a word about the emails, hadn't needed to. He could tell just by looking at me that something had shifted. They're never going to get it, are they? I asked him. He didn't say anything right away, just squeezed my hand tighter and said, "No, but you don't need them to anymore." He was right. I didn't. Not anymore. 3 weeks passed without another message, which should have made things feel settled, but instead, it just felt like waiting for something to crash. I'd gotten used to the chaos coming in waves. First the silence, then the manipulation, then the fallout. But this time it was like watching a balloon swell and wondering when it would finally burst. I kept telling myself that they'd eventually let it go, that Melody and my parents would retreat back into their illusion and forget I existed again. But I should have known better. People like that don't back down when they lose control, they double down. The next explosion came from Melody, of course, though she didn't come to me directly this time. Instead, she used our family's group chat, the one I'd muted months ago, to post a long, painfully performative message addressed to those of you questioning recent events. She claimed she was heartbroken by the gossip and rumors circulating, that it was deeply unfair for people to judge their family based on one person's bitterness, and that she'd always believed in rising above pettiness, no matter how difficult it may be. There were a few vague jabs about sabotage, some condescending gratitude toward those who'd remained loyal, and finally a reminder that her bridal shower was still on and she hoped to see true family there. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because as over-the-top as her speech was, it didn't stop the cancellations from pouring in. One of my cousins, someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year, forwarded me the RSVP thread from the group chat with a simple message. "Just thought you should see this." Nearly half of the original guest list had backed out. The reasons ranged from personal conflicts to unexpected travel issues, but it was clear from the tone of the replies that most people were simply done pretending. I wasn't the only one who had felt the weight of Melody's need to dominate every room or my parents' ability to make everything revolve around appearances. People had just stayed quiet for too long. The most surreal part came when I got a message from my Uncle Theo, who had always been one of my father's closest friends. He wrote me a short note thanking me for having the courage to speak the truth, and said that he and his wife were withdrawing from the wedding. He didn't make a big show of it, didn't offer unsolicited advice or pretend to know how I felt. Just acknowledged the truth for what it was and said, "We see it now." And that was all I'd ever really wanted, to be seen. My parents, of course, didn't take it well. When people stopped responding to their calls and emails, they turned their attention back to me. This time it was a phone call, unexpected and uninvited, as usual. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me wanted to hear what excuse they'd come up with next. It started predictably, my mother's voice already tight with irritation, my father quietly seething in the background. She demanded to know why so many people were refusing to support their daughter's wedding, and then accused me of deliberately poisoning the well. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told them the truth, again, in the same calm voice I used with uncooperative clients at work. I reminded them that I hadn't spread any lies, hadn't told anyone what to think, hadn't campaigned for people to take sides. All I had done was answer questions honestly. If that truth was inconvenient for them, maybe it wasn't the truth that was the problem. They didn't like that. My father accused me of exaggerating years of harmless comments, saying I had always been too sensitive. My mother, never one to miss a chance for melodrama, claimed I was trying to tear the family apart to make myself feel important. That last part nearly made me laugh, because what had they spent their lives doing if not holding everything together with tape and denial so they could maintain the illusion of being perfect? I didn't let them sidestep it this time. I told them exactly what it felt like to see their chairs empty at my wedding, how Darren's mother had to help me zip up my dress because mine refused to show up, how they'd spent years organizing Melody's imaginary wedding while acting like mine didn't deserve to exist. I told them that I knew about the photo shoots they helped pay for, the bridal consultations my mother booked for a daughter who wasn't even engaged yet, and the fact that even now, with everything happening, they were more concerned about the optics than the hurt they'd caused. They tried to interrupt me. They tried to pivot, but I just kept going. And then my mother said something that finally, once and for all, made everything click into place. She said, "We never expected you to try and ruin Melody's day just because you couldn't handle her success." It wasn't just the words. It was the fact that she said them with the kind of exasperated tone you'd use when a child throws a tantrum over a toy someone else got first. As if all of this came down to me being jealous. As if I hadn't spent years trying to earn even a sliver of the validation Melody got just for existing. As if I hadn't quietly swallowed disappointment after disappointment while they showered her with attention and praise. I didn't argue after that. I just stopped talking. There was no point in trying to reason with people who genuinely believed that my pain was a personal attack on their favorite daughter's fantasy. Even when presented with facts, with receipts, with the very real hurt I'd experienced, they still defaulted to the same tired narrative. I was the problem. I was the bitter one. I was the unstable element that threatened to blow apart their carefully built house of mirrors. The last thing my father said before I hung up was, "Maybe we should stop pretending we're a family, since you've already decided we're not." And for once, I agreed. I put the phone down, walked out onto the back patio, and stared at the sky until the weight of that conversation began to lift from my chest like fog evaporating in the morning sun. Darren came out a few minutes later, didn't say anything, just sat beside me and held my hand. I don't know how long we sat there in silence, but eventually I said, "They're never going to be who I needed them to be, are they?" And he just shook his head and said, "No, but you don't need them anymore." It wasn't the closure I thought I'd get. It wasn't the cinematic resolution people crave when they cut ties with family. But it was real, and it was enough. The morning after that final conversation with my parents, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in years, quiet. Not numb, not angry, not holding back tears behind a clenched jaw. Just quiet, like something heavy had finally been set down after being carried for far too long. I didn't tell anyone about the call at first. Not Darren, not my friends, not even the family members who'd been gently checking in on me as the wedding drama continued to unravel. I wanted to sit in the silence for a while and see if it stayed. And it did. But silence doesn't mean the storm outside had stopped. A few days later, I started hearing that Melody was losing even more support from the family. Some of the vendors pulled out. One of the catering companies cited logistical conflicts, but my aunt told me they'd actually received multiple last-minute demands from my mother that weren't part of the signed agreement. A cousin who was supposed to be a bridesmaid stepped back after a tense phone call where Melody accused her of picking sides simply for saying she'd reached out to me. Even relatives who had once remained loyal out of habit were quietly distancing themselves, too drained to pretend everything was fine anymore. Then came the public unraveling. Apparently, someone had asked my mom at a community event if she was excited about the big wedding coming up. Instead of just saying yes, she spiraled into a defensive monologue about how I had corrupted the family with my resentment and how people with nothing better to do were trying to ruin Melody's future. She did this in front of multiple people, some close to us, some casual acquaintances, and all of them stunned into silence. That story got back to me from 3 separate sources within 24 hours. The performance wasn't working anymore. But what made it all worse for them wasn't the drama. It was that I wasn't reacting to it. I hadn't made a single public statement. I hadn't sent a follow-up message or tried to defend myself. I just kept living, working, building routines, laughing with Darren, planning a short trip to Colorado to visit a friend I hadn't seen since college. The more they tried to control the narrative, the more obvious it became to everyone else who had been spinning the story all along. Melody made one final attempt to rope me back in. She sent me a letter, an actual printed letter, as if handwriting the words would somehow make them seem more genuine. Inside, she claimed that she was trying to take the high road and rebuild our sisterhood, but the language still dripped with that same performative tone she always used when she needed to be seen as the mature one. She mentioned her upcoming wedding, said there was still space for healing, and told me she hoped I'd be woman enough to take the opportunity. She even included an RSVP card for her bridal luncheon with a box marked, "Let's move forward together." I didn't reply. I didn't even finish reading it. I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and dropped it into the recycling bin. Not out of spite, out of clarity. There was nothing left to say. Later that night, Darren and I sat down with a glass of wine and just talked about the months we'd survived. He said something I won't forget. He looked at me, so calmly, and said, "They tried to write your story for you. And now, you've finally taken the pen back." I didn't cry. I just nodded. Because he was right. The strange thing is, I used to think that closure would look like some dramatic reckoning. I imagined long conversations where they finally saw what they'd done, apologized, cried, told me they were wrong. But closure didn't look like that at all. It looked like letting the phone ring and not answering. It looked like deleting emails without reading past the first line. It looked like walking away, not to prove anything, but because staying would mean breaking something in myself that I'd only just begun to rebuild. And through all of this, the most unexpected gift was what happened in my own relationship. Darren and I became stronger, more bonded in ways I never expected. He saw every sharp edge of my family dynamic, stood beside me when I didn't know what to say, and never once tried to fix it. Just held space for me to figure out who I wanted to be on the other side of it. We started spending more time outside, hiking the trails behind our neighborhood, finding new bookstores, cooking elaborate meals just because we could. I started laughing more, real, full laughter that didn't carry the weight of trying to be someone I wasn't. A few months after Melody's letter, we took a trip to a cabin in Northern California, nestled in the redwoods, no cell signal for miles. One morning, wrapped in blankets and drinking bad coffee by the fireplace, I realized I hadn't thought about my parents in days. Not with bitterness, not with longing, just hadn't thought about them at all. And that was when I knew I was finally free. Melody's wedding eventually happened, though from what I heard, it was much smaller than originally planned. A lot of people backed out in the final weeks, and some key family members, ones who had been staples at every major family gathering for years, never showed. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. The only reason I even heard it happened was because someone posted a photo on social media that got tagged by mistake. I scrolled past it without stopping. Now, I spend my energy on things that feel like home. My work. My friends. The small little life Darren and I are building that might not look impressive in photos, but feels full and true every day. The version of me who once twisted herself into knots for crumbs of validation doesn't exist anymore. She grew into someone who understands that love isn't something you have to audition for, and family isn't defined by blood if that blood makes you bleed for their approval. I don't know what the future holds for me and the people who raised me. Maybe they'll keep telling their version of the story. Maybe they'll rewrite it until they believe it. But that's their burden now, not mine. As for me, I'm moving forward without needing a resolution from people who never saw me clearly to begin with. I've stopped checking for their shadows behind me. I've started reaching for the light. Thank you to everyone who's followed this long, messy, unexpectedly healing journey. Your words, kindness, and encouragement meant more than I can say. If you're reading this and see yourself in any part of my story, I hope you know you're not alone. You deserve to take up space. You deserve peace. You deserve people who choose you the first time, no reminders required. And if you've been carrying a weight like mine, I hope you find your moment to set it down. Mine came when I finally realized that love built on conditions isn't love at all. And once I accepted that truth, I could finally begin again.